The white wolf's amber eyes locked onto Sarah Whitehorse through the blizzard, and for 3 seconds neither moved. Her body temperature had dropped to 32 degrees Celsius. The ropes binding her to the ancient pine had long since stopped hurting. Frostbite had seen to that. 13 minutes of daylight remained before the Wyoming wilderness would swallow her whole in darkness and cold that could crack bone. The wolf circled closer, limping on its left foreleg, and Sarah's dying mind registered the impossible: a surgical scar, clean and precise, running along the damaged limb. Her cracked lips formed a single word that disappeared into the wind: ghost. The massive creature stopped 5 feet away, through the snow, through the gathering dark, through 10 years of silence and solitude. Recognition passed between woman and beast. He had come back. But the question that would shock everyone wasn't why he came, it was what he'd sacrificed to save her. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Sarah Whitehorse had learned loneliness the way some people learn languages: slowly, painfully, until it became her native tongue. At 34, she was the sole wildlife ranger for 40 square miles of Rocky Mountain wilderness, living in her dead father's cabin with nothing but photographs and silence for company. The Cherokee blood in her veins came from her father's side, the Whitehorse clan, though her pale skin and green eyes spoke of a complicated family tree. Her mother, a school teacher with kind hands and a persistent cough, had died of cancer when Sarah was 12. Her father, Daniel Whitehorse, legendary ranger and the only parent she had left, was murdered by poachers 10 years ago. She'd found his body in the snow with a wolf pack sitting vigil around him, their breath forming clouds in the frozen air. She became a ranger to honor him. She wore his badge in her pocket, touched it when fear threatened to overwhelm her. She thought it would bring meaning to her life. Instead, it brought only more emptiness. The cabin sat 40 miles from the nearest town. Most nights, Sarah ate canned soup alone and listened to her father's old radio recordings, his voice calling in patrol reports, the static and distance making him sound like a ghost. She talked to his photograph because the trees, despite what poets claimed, never talked back. 3 years ago, she'd almost escaped the loneliness. Marcus Cole had appeared at her father's funeral with sympathetic eyes and strong shoulders. He'd helped with paperwork, with bills, with the suffocating weight of grief. For 2 years, she'd believed in him. When he proposed, she'd wept with relief, finally. Someone who wouldn't leave. He left anyway. 6 months after the engagement, he'd packed his truck and driven away. "You care more about dead things than living people," he'd said. Sarah had stood in the driveway watching his taillights disappear, the engagement ring heavy on the chain around her neck. She still wore it under her uniform, though she couldn't explain why. Perhaps as punishment, perhaps as a reminder that everyone eventually walked away. The cabin was drowning in debt. Her father's funeral had cost $18,000. His medical bills from the hospital, where he'd died slowly of hypothermia complications from the shooting, had cost another $29,000. The bank had sent 3 foreclosure notices. Sarah worked 16-hour shifts, not because the forest needed her, but because returning to that empty cabin felt like drowning. She'd volunteered for Christmas Eve patrol because she had nowhere else to go. No family, no friends who'd moved past acquaintance. Just her, the mountains, and the animals who didn't judge her for being fundamentally unlovable. What Sarah didn't know, what she couldn't know, as she'd set out that frozen morning, was that the forest had been keeping track of debts. 20 years ago, a 14-year-old girl had saved a wolf pup from a trap. The wolf, white as fresh snow and silent as prayer, had never forgotten. His name was Ghost, and on Christmas Eve, he would prove that loyalty has no expiration date. The call had come in at noon on Christmas Eve, illegal traps reported in the northern sector. Sarah had radio dispatch that she'd investigate. Nobody questioned why she'd volunteered for holiday duty. They'd stopped asking years ago. She'd been tracking wolf prints for 2 hours when she found the blood, dark drops in the snow, leading toward an old livestock barn that hadn't been used in decades. The tracks were fresh, multiple animals, dragged or carried. Tranquilizer darts littered the ground like spent cigarette butts. Sarah approached the barn with her hand on her radio. Through a gap in the weathered boards, she could see movement inside. Cages, at least a dozen metal cages stacked against the walls, and inside them her breath caught wolves, bears, a golden eagle with a broken wing. She recognized one wolf immediately, pure white fur, smaller than the others. A female, and in the cage beside her, 4 pups barely 6 months old, huddled together and whimpering. The smart choice would have been to call for backup. The Forest Service office was 2 hours away. But they'd come. They'd bring armed rangers and wildlife officers and do this properly. Sarah thought about those pups spending 2 more hours in those cages. She thought about her father, who died protecting animals just like these. She thought about the promise she'd made at his grave, that his death would mean something. She picked the lock on the barn door. It opened with a rusted groan that made her wince. Inside, the smell hit her first fear: waste, blood. The wolves watched her approach with yellow eyes that held no hope, only resignation. Sarah pulled out her phone and started photographing everything: evidence, serial numbers on the cages, the tranquilizer guns mounted on the wall, a ledger on a makeshift desk, listing prices: Arctic wolf pup, $15,000. Grizzly cub, $22,000. As she was photographing the white female wolf, when she heard the voice behind her. "I was hoping you wouldn't come today." Sarah spun around. 4 men stood in the barn entrance, blocking the light. All wore hunting gear, their faces hidden behind balaclavas. The one who'd spoken stepped forward, and something about his build, his stance, made Sarah's stomach drop even before he reached up and pulled the mask away. Marcus Cole's familiar face smiled at her with something that might have been regret. "Marcus," her voice came out strangled. "What are you doing here?" "Business, Sarah." He gestured at the cages with casual pride. "This operation makes $2 million a year. Your father found out about it 10 years ago. I couldn't let him tell anyone." The world tilted. Sarah grabbed the desk for support. Dad found out about you. He was tracking our transport routes. Got too close." Marcus shrugged, the gesture obscene in its nonchalance. "I didn't want to kill him. Sarah, I like Daniel. But business is business. You killed my father, Petit." The words felt too big for her mouth, too impossible to be real. "You killed him, and then you came to his funeral. You held me while I cried. I had to make sure the investigation didn't go anywhere." Marcus's voice held something almost like sympathy. "Dating you was convenient. I could monitor what the Rangers knew, what leads they were following. When they closed the case, I didn't need to stay anymore." Sarah's hand moved toward her radio. Marcus was faster. He crossed the space between them and ripped the radio from her belt. smashing it against the floor. "I really did care about you," he said. And the terrible thing was, he sounded sincere. "But you're too much like your father. You don't know when to look away." One of the other men stepped forward. "What do we do with her?" Marcus considered Sarah for a long moment, his head tilted like he was solving a math problem. "We leave her. Just leave her. 3 miles from here, there's a stand of old pines. Very remote, very cold." Marcus pulled a length of rope from his jacket. "We tied her up. Take her phone, her GPS tracker. By the time anyone realizes she's missing, hypothermia will have done our work for us. No bullet wounds, no evidence, just another tragic accident." Sarah tried to run. She made it 5 steps before 2 of them grabbed her arms. She fought, screaming, but a cloth pressed over her face. Chemicals sweet and suffocating. Her vision tunneled to a point of light. Then nothing. She woke to cold. Bone-deep, soul-stealing cold. Her back pressed against rough bark, her arms wrenched behind her and bound so tightly her hands had gone numb. Rope circled her chest, her waist, her legs, securing her to what felt like a tree trunk. Marcus crouched in front of her, checking the knots with professional efficiency. Behind him, the forest stretched empty and white. "Where?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Where are we?" "Far enough." Marcus stood, brushing snow from his knees. "Your radio's destroyed. I've got your phone and GPS tracker. Nobody knows you're here. Sarah, you volunteered for solo Christmas patrol. Remember, they won't even start looking until tomorrow morning." One of his colleagues shifted uncomfortably. "We could just shoot her. This seems—" "No bullets, no evidence." Marcus pulled a small camera from his pack and mounted it in a tree across the clearing. "Besides, there's a market for this kind of footage. Rangers last hours. Some people pay very well for authentic suffering." Sarah's stomach heaved. "You're going to film me dying. The dark web has interesting customers." Marcus activated the camera, its red light blinking. "I'm sorry it came to this. I meant what I said. I did care about you once, but money loves me more than you ever could." He turned to leave, then paused. "Merry Christmas, Sarah." They walked away, their footsteps crunching through snow until the forest swallowed the sound completely. Sarah was alone with the cold, the camera's unblinking eye, and the absolute certainty that she was going to die exactly as her father had frozen and abandoned, with only the trees as witnesses. She looked at the sky. The sun hung low, already starting its descent. Maybe 2 hours of daylight left. After that, temperatures would plummet to 20 below zero. Even if she could somehow free herself, she was 3 miles from the nearest landmark in terrain she didn't recognize. Sarah thought about her father's badge in her pocket, just barely reachable if she strained her fingers. She thought about the empty cabin, the foreclosure notices, the decade of loneliness that had led her to this moment. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe she'd been dead for years already, and this was just her body catching up to the truth. In the distance, something howled. The sound was high and mournful, and Sarah closed her eyes against tears that would only freeze on her cheeks. An hour passed, then another. Sarah's body had stopped shivering, which she knew from her wilderness training meant she'd progressed past the early stages of hypothermia. Her core temperature was dropping, her organs slowly shutting while her fingers had gone from painful to numb to nothing at all. The white shape appeared so gradually that Sarah thought it was a hallucination, a pale blur moving between the snow-laden pines, there and gone, like something from a dream. She blinked hard, trying to clear her vision, but the cold made her thoughts slow and thick as honey. The shape materialized into something solid, a wolf, massive, easily 140 pounds, with fur so white it seemed to glow against the darkening forest. It moved with a pronounced limp, favoring its left foreleg. Sarah's survival instincts screamed at her to be afraid, but fear required energy she no longer possessed. She watched with detached curiosity as the wolf approached, stopping 15 feet away, its amber eyes fixed on her with an intensity that felt almost human. The wolf circled slowly, and as it moved, Sarah saw the scar, a clean line running along the left foreleg, healed with the precision of surgical sutures. Her mind, sluggish with cold, suddenly sharpened with recognition. 20 years ago, Sarah had been 14. She'd found a wolf pup caught in an illegal trap, its leg nearly severed. Her father had been furious when she'd brought it home, insisted it needed to go back to the wild. But Sarah had spent 3 months nursing that pup in the shed behind their cabin, learning to clean wounds and administer antibiotics from veterinary manuals. She'd named him Ghost because of his white fur, because he moved silent as smoke. When her father finally insisted the wolf had to be released, Sarah had cried for days. She'd walked Ghost 3 miles into the forest and watched him disappear into the trees, certain she'd never see him again. But over the years, Ghost had returned, never close, never tame, but present. After her mother's funeral, she'd heard howling outside her window. After her father's death, she'd found a dead rabbit on her porch, a food offering in the language of wolves. After Marcus left, Ghost's white form had appeared at the tree line for 3 consecutive nights, watching her cabin as if standing guard. Sarah had never told anyone. They'd think her crazy, reading meaning into animal behavior. But now, staring at that surgical scar she'd created with her own trembling teenage hands, she knew. Ghost. The word came out as a whisper, her vocal cords nearly frozen. It's really you. The wolf's ears pricked forward at his name. He took 3 careful steps closer, his limp more pronounced. He was old. Sarah realized wolves rarely live past 8 years in the wild, but if this was the same pup she'd saved, Ghost would be 14 now. Ancient, by wolf standards. He approached until she could feel his breath, warm against her frozen face. He sniffed her cheek, her hair, her throat, where her pulse beat weakly. Then he did something that made Sarah's heart crack open. He licked the frozen tears from her cheeks with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a predator. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "I can't help you this time. I can't even help myself." Ghost stepped back and examined her bonds. He circled the tree, his nose following the rope from her chest to where it wrapped behind the trunk. He pawed at the knots, then stopped, seeming to assess the complexity of what he faced. Sarah watched in amazement as Ghost lowered his head and carefully took a strand of rope between his teeth. He pulled gently, testing. The rope held. He tried again with more force, his head turning to avoid Sarah's skin. She could feel him working, the rope shifting minutely with each attempt. "You're trying to free me," Sarah said, her voice thick with wonder and grief. "You came back to save me." Ghost paused and looked at her, and in his amber eyes, Sarah saw something that defied her scientific training, that challenged everything she'd been taught about animal behavior. She saw recognition, purpose, choice. He returned to his work, using his incisors to pull at the thicker strands. Progress was agonizingly slow. The knots were tight and slightly frozen from the moisture of Sarah's breath. Every few minutes, Ghost would stop to lick her face, as if checking that she was still conscious. Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks, freezing before they could fall. This creature owed her nothing. She'd saved Ymir once, 2 decades ago, and the debt, if such a thing even existed between species, should have been long paid. Yet here he was, working with painstaking care to free her, his old body shaking with effort. "Why?" Sarah asked. "Why did you come back?" In the distance, a sound cut through the quiet forest, high-pitched and desperate wolves howling. Not the territorial calls Sarah was used to, but distress signals, the kind of sound a pack made when they were trapped or threatened. Ghost's head snapped up, his entire body going rigid. He stared into the darkening forest, toward the direction of the howling, his family. Sarah realized the white female and the pups she'd seen in the cages. They had to be close. Marcus must not have moved them yet. Ghost looked back at Sarah, then toward the howls, then back again. She could see the war happening in his body, the tension in his shoulders, the way his paws shifted as if he wanted to run. Every instinct must have been screaming at him to go to his mate. His children. "Go," Sarah said, forcing the word through frozen lips. "Go to them, please. I'm nobody. They need you." Ghost didn't move. He stood between Sarah and the direction of the howls, his body a wall of impossible choice. The howling came again, more desperate now, and Ghost's ears flattened against his skull. A low whine escaped his throat. Sarah understood then this wasn't about debt or gratitude. This was about something deeper, something that transcended the boundaries between human and animal. Ghost had made a choice, and he was refusing to unmake it, even as his family called to him. "I don't deserve this," Sarah whispered. "I'm not worth losing them." But Ghost had already turned back to the ropes. He worked with renewed urgency now, pulling harder, his teeth tearing at the fibers. Sarah could see blood on his gums where the rough rope had cut him. But he didn't stop. The sun was nearly gone. Maybe 30 minutes of light remained. After that, even if Ghost freed her, Sarah doubted she could walk. Her core temperature had to be dangerously low. Her thoughts kept drifting, and she had to fight to stay focused. Ghost managed to fray the outer layer of rope, but the core was too thick. He sat back, panting heavily, his breath creating clouds in the freezing air. He looked at the rope, then at Sarah, then back at the rope. His tail, which had been still, suddenly moved in what looked like frustration. He barked once, sharply. Then again, it wasn't aggression, it was communication. He was trying to tell her something, trying to make her understand what he needed her to do. Sarah looked at the rope, then at the tree bark behind her. An idea formed slowly in her cold, numbed mind. If she could somehow weaken the rope herself, create a thinner section that Ghost could bite through. She began scraping her right wrist against the rough bark of the pine tree. The movement was tiny, barely perceptible, but she kept at it, back and forth, ignoring the pain as the bark tore at her already damaged skin. Blood made the rope slippery, which helped the friction. Ghost watched intently. When Sarah glanced up at him and nodded toward the section she'd been weakening, he seemed to understand. He lowered his head again, positioned his mouth over that exact spot, and prepared to bite. "On 3, Sarah whispered. 1, 2, 3. Ghost bit down hard. Sarah felt the rope shift, heard fibers snapping. The wolf pulled backward with all his aged strength, and suddenly the sound that cut through the clearing wasn't the rope breaking. It was something worse, a low, menacing growl that didn't come from Ghost. Both Sarah and the wolf turned toward the noise. Through the gathering darkness, a shape emerged from the underbrush, low-slung, powerful, with a distinctive hunched gait, a wolverine, one of nature's most fearless predators. Ghost immediately stopped working on the rope. He positioned himself between Sarah and the approaching threat, his body tense, his lips pulling back to show teeth, still bleeding from his rescue efforts. The wolverine stopped 20 feet away, its small eyes fixed on Sarah, on the smell of her blood. It had come for easy prey, and now it faced a wolf who refused to move aside. Sarah's heart, already struggling, began to hammer against her ribs. Ghost was old, injured, exhausted from his efforts to free her. A wolverine could kill a wolf under the right circumstances, and these were exactly the wrong circumstances for Ghost to fight. "Please," Sarah begged, though she didn't know if she was talking to Ghost or to God, or to the universe that had already taken so much from her. "Please, not like this." Ghost planted his feet and roared a challenge into the darkening forest. The wolverine answered with its own battle cry, and the last of the daylight began to die. The wolverine circled slowly, its muscular body low to the ground. Sarah knew from her training that wolverines were among the most fearless predators in North America, pound for pound, one of the most ferocious. They'd been documented driving bears away from kills, fighting off wolf packs, attacking animals 3 times their size. Ghost held his ground, but Sarah could see the tremor in his aged legs. He was 14 years old, injured, exhausted from his rescue attempt. This wasn't a fair fight. This wasn't even close to fair. As the wolverine shifted position, Sarah caught sight of something that made her blood run colder than the hypothermia already killing her. On the wolverine's neck, barely visible through its thick fur, was a fresh injection mark. The skin around it was inflamed and angry. Marcus. He'd released this animal deliberately, drugged it to be hyper-aggressive. This wasn't nature. This was execution by proxy. Ghost. "Run," Sarah begged, her voice barely audible. "Please, this isn't your fight." The wolverine lunged. Ghost met it head-on, using his weight advantage to knock the smaller predator sideways. But wolverines were built like tanks, compact, muscular, with loose skin that made them difficult to pin. It twisted in Ghost's grip and raked its claws across the wolf's right ear. Blood sprayed across the white snow, shockingly red. Ghost yelped, but didn't retreat. He snapped at the wolverine's flank, his teeth finding purchase. The wolverine shrieked and spun, its claws finding Ghost's back leg. Sarah screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. She thrashed against her bonds, desperate, feeling the rope cut deeper into her wrists. Hot blood ran down her arms, melting the frost on her skin. "Stop it! Leave him alone!" The Ghost limped backward, favoring both his injured legs now. The wolverine pressed its advantage, darting in and out, using its lower center of gravity to stay beneath Ghost's snapping jaws. It was a calculated attack, wearing down the older predator through 1,000 small wounds. Sarah watched in helpless agony as Ghost fought for her life, while she could do nothing but bleed and freeze every time Ghost yelped in pain. Something inside her shattered a little more. This loyal, beautiful creature was dying because of her, because she'd been foolish enough to investigate alone, because she'd trusted a monster who'd worn a human face. Ghost managed to land a solid bite on the wolverine's shoulder, shaking it hard. The wolverine went limp for a moment, a feint, then twisted and sank its teeth into Ghost's front leg, right over the old surgical scar. Ghost's howl of pain cut through Sarah like a blade. That was the leg she'd saved 20 years ago, the leg she'd carefully stitched and bandaged while a terrified pup whimpered in her arms. Now it was being torn open again, and she was powerless to stop it. No, 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 Sarah sobbed, yanking against the ropes with a strength born of pure desperation. She felt something in her left thumb give way, dislocation. Probably, but she didn't care. She wrenched her hand at an agonizing angle, feeling bones grind. And suddenly there was space, just enough space. Her hand, slick with blood, slipped through the binding. The wolverine had Ghost pinned against a fallen log, going for his throat. Sarah's free hand dove into her jacket pocket, searching frantically. Her fingers found it, the emergency flare she always carried. Standard Ranger equipment. Her numb fingers fumbled with the cap, and for a terrible moment she thought she'd lost all dexterity. Then the cap came free. She pulled the cord with her teeth. The flare ignited with a brilliant red explosion of light and acrid sulfur smoke. Sarah threw it with all her remaining strength. It landed 3 feet from the wolverine, spitting sparks and chemical fire. The wolverine leaped backward, its drug-addled brain confused by the sudden sensory assault. It circled the flare twice, snarling, then fixed its gaze on Sarah with renewed focus. The flare had saved Ghost, but now the wolverine had a new target, the bleeding, helpless human. Ghost struggled to his feet, placing himself between Sarah and the threat once more. He could barely stand. Blood matted his white fur in a dozen places. His right ear hung at an odd angle, nearly severed, but his amber eyes were clear and determined. The wolverine feinted left, then right. Ghost matched its movements, refusing to give ground. The standoff lasted 30 seconds that felt like hours. Then the wolverine, perhaps calculating that the injured wolf wasn't worth the continued fight, or perhaps disturbed by the hissing flare, turned and loped into the darkening forest. The moment it disappeared, Ghost's legs gave out. He collapsed onto his side in the blood-stained snow. His breathing labored and wet. Sarah heard the rattle in his chest and knew punctured lung. Probably. Internal bleeding. Certainly. Ghost. Sarah's other hand was still bound, but she strained forward as far as the rope allowed. Stretching until her shoulder screamed, her free hand could just barely reach his head. She touched his muzzle with her fingertips, felt his hot breath against her frozen skin. Ghost's eyes found hers. Even in his pain, even dying, he looked at her with something Sarah could only describe as peace, as if this bleeding out in the snow to save her was exactly where he was supposed to be. "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face and freezing immediately. You should have run. You should have gone to your family. Why did you stay? Why did you choose me?" Ghost shifted slightly, clearly in agony, and rested his massive head on her lap as much as the ropes allowed. The gesture was so trusting, so gentle, that Sarah broke completely. She bent forward until her forehead touched his, her tears falling onto his white fur. "I don't deserve you, ksh," she said. "I'm not worth this." In her mind, unbidden, came memories. Not just of saving Ghost as a pup, but of all the times he'd appeared over the years. After her mother died, when 12-year-old Sarah had cried in the woods behind her house, Ghost had been there, a white shape in the trees, keeping vigil. After her father's death, Ghost had sat outside her cabin for 3 nights straight, as if standing guard while she grieved. After Marcus left, Ghost had brought her food rabbits, mice, once even a fish from the creek, as if he understood she was too broken to care for herself. She'd saved his life once. He'd been saving hers for 20 years. "I see you now," Sarah whispered. "I finally see what you've been trying to tell me, that I matter, that I'm worth saving, that loyalty isn't about what someone can give you. It's about choosing them anyway." Ghost's tail moved weakly, a tiny wag. His eyes were starting to glaze with pain and blood loss, but he kept them fixed on Sarah, as if she were the only thing anchoring him to life. Sarah looked at the rope, still binding her right hand and torso. The flare had bought the maquette, but it was still burning down. Maybe 5 more minutes of light and heat. Ghost had managed to fray the outer layers earlier, before the wolverine attacked. If she could just... She twisted her free hand to grab the rope, positioned it against the sharp bark of the pine tree, and began sawing frantically. The bark bit into the rope fibers, into her already damaged hand. But she didn't stop, back and forth, while Ghost's breathing grew shallower. "Stay with me," Sarah commanded, her voice fierce despite her weakness. "You hear me, Ghost. You stay with me. You don't get to die. Not after everything, not after you came back." The rope was giving way, strand by strand. Sarah could feel progress, could see the fibers separating. Her hand was bleeding heavily now, making everything slippery, but she used that to her advantage, twisting the rope to create more friction against the bark. Ghost whimpered softly. Sarah looked down and saw his eyes starting to close. "No!" She yanked harder on the rope, ignoring the pain shooting through her dislocated thumb. "Ghost, look at me. Remember when you were a pup and you wouldn't take medicine I had to wrap it in meat and trick you? Remember how you growled at Dad when he came too close to your recovery shed? You were so stubborn. Be stubborn now." Ghost's eyes flickered open. He looked at her with such trust, such absolute faith, that Sarah felt something fundamental shift inside her. She'd spent 10 years believing she was cursed, that everyone she loved was destined to die. But Ghost had chosen to come back, had chosen to fight for her, had chosen her over his own family's cries for help. That wasn't a curse. That was love. The rope suddenly gave way with a snap that echoed in the clearing. Sarah's right arm fell free, dead weight from lack of circulation. She used her left hand to attack the rope around her torso. Her movements clumsy and desperate. The binding loosened, then loosened more. She could breathe deeper. She could move. With a final surge of effort, Sarah tore the last of the rope away and collapsed forward, free but too weak to stand. She crawled to Ghost on her hands and knees, leaving a trail of blood in the snow. She pulled off her ranger jacket, the only warmth she had, and spread it over Ghost's shivering body. "You're going to be okay," she said, even though she knew it might be a lie. "We're both going to be okay." Ghost's breathing was shallow and irregular. Sarah did a quick assessment. With the hands that could barely feel, the ear wound was bad, but not fatal if treated soon. The leg wounds were deep. The real danger was internal. She could see blood on his gums when he panted, which meant internal bleeding. He needed a veterinarian. He needed emergency care. He needed things Sarah couldn't provide in the middle of nowhere, with the sun setting and her own body shutting down from hypothermia. Sarah looked around the clearings desperately. As if help might materialize from the darkening forest, the flare was nearly dead, its red light flickering. Her phone and jet were gone, smashed or taken by Marcus. Her radio was destroyed. She was 3 miles from anywhere with no idea which direction to go, and the temperature was dropping toward 20 below zero. Ghost made a sound, half whine, half growl. Sarah looked down and saw him staring at something. She followed his gaze and felt a heart stop. Men's voices, distant, but drawing closer. Flashlight beams cutting through the trees. For one wild moment, Sarah hoped it was rescue. Then she heard Marcus's voice. "The camera's still recording. Let's check if she's dead yet. If not, we'll finish it and move the footage somewhere else." They were coming back. Sarah looked at Ghost, then at the dying flare, then at the ropes scattered around her. She was free, but too weak to run, since Ghost was injured and dying. They had no weapons, no way to defend themselves. This was it. This was how it ended. Then Sarah remembered when she dislocated her thumb to free her first hand. Her fingers had brushed against something else in her jacket pocket, not the flare that had been in the outside pocket. Something in the inside pocket, secured with a zipper she'd forgotten about. With trembling fingers, Sarah unzipped the pocket. Her hand closed around cold metal. Her father's service pistol. She'd put it there 3 weeks ago during a moment of such profound despair that she'd driven to the highest point in her patrol area and sat with the gun in her lap for 2 hours, trying to find a reason not to end everything. She'd eventually put the gun in her jacket pocket and forgotten about it, too ashamed to take it out again. Now, that shame might save both their lives. Sarah pulled out the pistol and checked it with practiced movements her father had taught her. Fully loaded, safety on. She clicked the safety off and braced herself against the tree. The gun pointed toward the approaching voices. Ghost. Understanding somehow that danger was coming. Tried to stand. He made it halfway up before his legs buckled. Sarah reached out with her free hand and touched his head. "Rest," she whispered. "I've got this. You saved me. Now let me save you." The flashlight beams were getting closer. Sarah could see shadows moving between the trees, maybe 40 yards away. Marcus's voice. "I told you we should have just shot her. This was too complicated." Another voice. "You said no evidence." "There won't be. We'll make it look like she shot herself. It's suicide. The lonely ranger who couldn't take it anymore. Everyone in town will believe it." Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. Her hands were shaking from cold, from fear, from rage at the man who'd murdered her father and then slept in her bed. She could shoot him. She could end this right now. She had every right. But her father's voice echoed in her memory. "We protect life. Sarah, even when it's hard, even when they don't deserve it, that's what makes us different from them." Sarah adjusted her aim, not to kill, but to stop. The flashlights broke through into the clearing. Marcus stepped out first, his gun raised. He saw the empty ropes, the blood-covered snow. Sarah standing with her weapon pointed directly at his chest. His eyes widened. "Sarah, drop your gun," Sarah said, her voice steady despite everything. "Now?" For a moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, Marcus lowered his weapon. And that's when the gray wolves arrived. They came like ghosts through the darkness. 5 gray wolves, their coats mottled with shadow and moonlight. The alpha male was massive, easily matching Ghost's size, his yellow eyes reflecting the dying flare light. The pack fanned out in a practiced formation, surrounding the clearing with predatory precision. Sarah's first thought was that they'd come for Ghost. Arctic wolves weren't native to this region. A white wolf in gray wolf territory would be seen as an intruder, a threat to their established order. Ghost, already injured and weakened, wouldn't survive another fight. But the gray alpha wasn't looking at Ghost. His attention was fixed on Marcus and his 3 companions, who had frozen mid-step. The other gray wolves circled behind the men, cutting off their escape route. This wasn't an attack on Ghost. This was territorial defense against human invaders. "Don't move," Sarah said quietly, though she didn't know if she was talking to Marcus or to herself. Gray wolves are territorial. Any sudden movement, one of Marcus's men panicked and ran. He made it 6 steps before 2 wolves cut him off. Snarling, he stumbled backward, fell, and the wolves stood over him, not attacking, but pinning him in place with their physical presence and bared teeth. Marcus slowly raised his gun toward the nearest wolf. Sarah's finger tightened on her trigger. "Don't," she said. "They're protecting their territory. We are the invaders here. If you shoot, the whole pack will attack." "Then what do you suggest?" Marcus's voice was tight with fear, all his earlier confidence stripped away. "We wait until they decide to eat us." The gray alpha padded forward, his massive head lowered, his eyes never leaving Marcus. He stopped 10 feet away and did something Sarah had never seen in her years as a ranger. He looked at Ghost, then at Sarah, then back at Marcus, assessing, making a choice. Ghost, still lying beneath the Sarah's jacket, let out a low, rumbling sound, not a growl of aggression, something else. Communication. The gray alpha's ears twitched. He took another step toward Marcus, and this time his lips pulled back to show teeth. Sarah suddenly understood. The gray wolves had been following Ghost's blood trail. They'd tracked him to this clearing and found him injured, surrounded by armed humans. In their animal logic, these men were the threat. And Ghost, despite being a different species, despite being white where they were gray, was the victim they recognized. "Marcus," Sarah said carefully, "you need to put your gun down. Slowly. The pack thinks you hurt Ghost. They're going to attack you if you don't submit." "Submit to animals," Marcus laughed. But there was hysteria in it. "I'm not going to—" The gray alpha lunged. Not a full attack, but a warning strike that brought his snapping jaws within inches of Marcus's face. Marcus screamed and fired his gun into the air. The sound shattered the night, and chaos erupted. The wolf pack attacked not Ghost, not Sarah, but Marcus and his men. It happened so fast, Sarah could barely track it. Wolves on Marcus's back, teeth in his jacket, dragging him down. His gun flew from his hand. landing in the snow 10 feet away. One of his men tried to run again and was tackled by 3 wolves working in coordination. Ghost struggled to his feet, swaying dangerously. Sarah grabbed his collar when it had gotten a collar. She looked closer and realized it wasn't a collar at all, but a thick ruff of fur matted with dried blood and dirt. She held on to it anyway, keeping him steady. "Ghost, stay," she commanded, using the tone she'd used when he was a pup refusing to rest. "You can't fight. You'll die." Through the chaos, Sarah heard another sound, a mechanical whine growing louder. Helicopter rotors. She looked up and saw searchlights sweeping through the trees, growing brighter, closer. The sound was coming from the south, which meant it wasn't Marcus's people. It was rescue. The helicopter appeared over the tree line, its spotlight flooding the clearing with harsh white light. A loudspeaker crackled. "This is U.S. Forest Service. We have located Sarah Whitehorse. Ground team, move in." The wolves shattered at the noise and light, melting back into the forest as quickly as they'd appeared. All except the gray alpha, who lingered for a moment, looking at Ghost. Some unspoken communication passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, or simply a recognition of shared purpose. Then he, too, vanished into the darkness. Marcus lay in the snow, his jacket shredded, bleeding from multiple bite wounds but alive. His 3 colleagues were in similar conditions, injured, terrified, but breathing. The wolves had been precise in their attack, taking down threats without going for fatal wounds. The helicopter landed in a clearing 50 yards away, and within seconds, rangers and medics were rushing toward them. Sarah recognized the lead ranger, Tom Bradley, the county sheriff, who'd investigated her father's death 10 years ago. Behind him came paramedics carrying emergency equipment. Sarah. Bradley reached her first, his flashlight sweeping over her blood-covered form. The injured wolf, the bound men in the snow. What in God's name happened here? Sarah's legs finally gave out. She collapsed, still holding on to Ghost's fur. "Marcus," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "Marcus Cole. He killed my father. He's been running a wildlife trafficking ring. There's a barn 2 miles east, caged animals. Evidence. His camera." She pointed to the tree where Marcus had mounted it, recorded his confession. Bradley's face went pale in the flashlight beam. "Marcus Cole Sarah. That's a serious accusation. Are you sure you're not confused from the cold?" "She's not confused," said one of Marcus's men, the one who'd wanted to just shoot Sarah instead of leaving her to freeze. He was sitting up now, his arm bleeding from wolf bites. His face desperate. "I'll testify. I'll tell you everything. Marcus killed Ranger Whitehorse 10 years ago. He's been trafficking endangered animals. He was going to kill her, too, and me. I found his plan in the truck. He was going to eliminate all witnesses." Marcus, still on the ground, started to protest, but another medic was already pulling out handcuffs. "Sir, you need to remain still. You're injured and under arrest, pending investigation." "This is insane," Marcus said, trying for his old confident charm, even with blood running down his face. "Sarah, tell them you're confused, that the hypothermia is making you. I loved you." Sarah cut him off, her voice raw. "I mourned with you. I cried on your shoulder about my father, and it was you. It was you the whole time." Bradley was on his radio. "Dispatch, we need police backup, wildlife rescue team, and forensic investigators at my location. Multiple arrests for wildlife trafficking and suspicion of murder. Also requesting immediate veterinary support for injured wolf. A paramedic knelt beside Sarah, wrapping a thermal blanket around her shoulders. "Ma'am, I need to check your vitals. Your core temperature is dangerously low. We need to get you to a hospital." "The wolf first," Sarah said, her grip on Ghost not loosening. "Please? He saved my life. He's bleeding internally. He needs help now. Ma'am, you're hypothermic. You need—" "I won't let go." Sarah's voice rose to a shout that cost her most of her remaining energy. "I won't leave him. He came back for me when no one else would. He fought for me. You help him first, or I don't go." The medics exchanged glances. One of them spoke into his radio. "Dispatch, requesting emergency veterinary services. We have a critically injured wolf on scene." Another voice came from behind them, a woman in her 50s wearing a veterinary services jacket. "I'm Dr. Chen with Wildlife Rescue. I was in the helicopter. Let me see the animal." Dr. Chen knelt beside Ghost, her practiced hands moving over his injuries. Sarah watched her face, trying to read every micro-expression. The vet's frown deepened as she examined the punctured lung, the deep lacerations, the old surgical scar torn open again. "This wolf is elderly," Dr. Chen said quietly, "and these injuries are severe. Ma'am, I need to be honest with you. The humane thing might be to—" "No," Sarah said flatly. "You save him, whatever it takes. I'll pay for it. I'll sell everything I own. Just save him." Dr. Chen looked at Sarah, really looked at her, at the blood and rope burns on her wrist, at the hypothermia-induced tremors, at the absolute determination in her frost-bitten face, at the way Shrusha was holding the wolf, like he was the last solid thing in a dissolving world. "All right," the vet said, "but we need to move now. We have a mobile surgical unit in the helicopter. How long has he been injured?" 20 minutes, maybe 30. Dr. Chen's team moved with impressive efficiency. They had Ghost on a stretcher, within minutes, an IV line in his leg, oxygen mask over his muzzle. Sarah stumbled alongside them, refusing to let go, until a medic gently but firmly caught her arm. "Ms. Whitehorse, you can't come in the helicopter. There's not enough room. You need to go in the ground ambulance for treatment." Sarah's vision was tunneling. She could feel her body shutting down, the hypothermia finally winning after she'd pushed it back through sheer force of will. She looked at Ghost, at his labored breathing, at the blood still seeping through the emergency bandages. "Will he live?" she asked Dr. Chen. The vet paused at the helicopter door. "I don't know, but I promise you, I'll fight for him as hard as he fought for you." It had to be enough. Sarah's legs buckled. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was Ghost being loaded into the helicopter, and the last thing she felt was the weight of her father's badge in her pocket, pressing against her heart like a promise kept. She woke briefly in the ambulance to find Sheriff Bradley sitting beside her, his face grim. "Sarah, I need to tell you something about Marcus and the investigation into your father's death." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "You were part of it." Bradley flinched as if she'd struck him. "What? You were part of the trafficking ring? You covered up Marcus's involvement in my father's murder?" "Sarah, no, I would never." Then why did you close the investigation so quickly? Even through her delirium. Sarah's mind was sharp on this point. 3 weeks. You ruled it an accident in 3 weeks? Even though my father had bullet wounds. Bradley's silence was answer enough. Detective Morrison is waiting at the hospital, Bradley said finally, from the state police. He'll want your full statement. Are you going to arrest yourself? Sarah asked, her words slurring. Or should I do it for you? I was trying to protect you, Bradley said quietly. Marcus threatened to kill you if I didn't close the case. I thought if I backed off, if I let it go, he'd leave you alone. You let him kill my father, and you thought you were protecting me? Sarah laughed, a broken sound. You let a murderer walk free. You let him into my life, into my bed. You... Her voice cracked. How many other people did he hurt? Because you were too much of a coward to do your job. Bradley stood, his hand on the ambulance door. I'm turning myself in. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring my father back, Sarah said. Sorry doesn't give me back 10 years. Sorry doesn't... She lost consciousness again. And this time, she didn't wake for 2 days. When she finally opened her eyes, she was in a hospital room with monitors beeping softly around her. Her hands were bandaged. An IV dripped clear fluid into her arm. Every part of her body hurt with the deep, bone-level ache of severe cold injury. A nurse noticed she was awake and smiled. Ms. Whitehorse, welcome back. You gave us quite a scare. Ghost, Sarah croaked. The wolf, is he? Dr. Chen operated on him for 6 hours. The nurse said, he's in critical condition, but he's stable. She said to tell you he's fighting just like you did. Sarah closed her eyes, tears leaking out. Can I see him? Not yet. You've had severe hypothermia, frostbite on 3 fingers and both feet, a dislocated thumb, and you were severely dehydrated. You need to rest and heal. How long have I been here? 2 days. It's December 27th. You've been in and out of consciousness. The nurse adjusted her IV. There are several people waiting to talk to you, too. Police detectives, FBI agents, reporters. But Dr. Patel said no visitors until you're stronger. FBI. Your case broke open a major interstate wildlife trafficking ring. 15 arrests so far, including Marcus Cole and Sheriff Bradley. Your testimony is crucial, but first, you need to heal. Sarah looked at her bandaged hands and thought about Ghost, somewhere in this hospital, fighting for his life, because he'd refused to abandon her. She thought about her father, dead for 10 years, 'cause he'd tried to stop evil men. She thought about all the years she'd spent believing she was cursed, that everyone she loved was destined to die. But Ghost hadn't died. Not yet. He was fighting. And if he could fight old and injured and bleeding, then so could she. I want to make a statement, Sarah said. I want to tell them everything, every detail, every crime. I want Marcus and everyone like him to pay for what they've done. The nurse smiled. That's the spirit. But first, you eat something and let us make sure you're not going to lose any fingers to frostbite. Deal? Deal, Sarah said. But after that, I talk. And I don't stop talking until every single one of those bastards is behind bars. On the 3rd day, Dr. Chen came to Sarah's room with news that made her heart stop. "Ghost is declining," the veterinarian said without preamble. She looked exhausted, her eyes squinted-rimmed. "We've done everything we can. The surgery repaired the internal bleeding, and we've treated the infections. But his body is shutting down. He's 14 years old. Sarah, that's ancient for a wild wolf. His organs are simply giving out." Sarah struggled to sit up, ignoring the pain in her frost-damaged hands. "Let me see him, please. You can barely walk. You've still got IV lines." "I don't care." Sarah pulled the IV from her arm, ignoring the nurse's protest. "He fought for me when he should have run. The least I can do is be there at the end." Chen studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll get a wheelchair." They wheeled Sarah down to the veterinary wing in the hospital's basement, a specialized facility for treating service animals and wildlife. Ghost lay in a large recovery kennel, his white fur matted and dull, his breathing shallow. Monitors tracked his failing vitals with quiet, persistent beeps. Sarah's hands shook as she reached through the kennel door to touch his head. Ghost's eyes flickered open, unfocused at first, then finding her face. His tail moved once, a weak attempt at a wag. "Hey, boy," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here. I'm right here." "Doctor," Chen stood quietly in the doorway, "I can give him something to ease the pain, to let him go peacefully. It would be the kindest thing." Sarah thought about her father, dying slowly in a hospital bed 10 years ago, his last words a plea for her to protect what he couldn't. She thought about all the years she'd spent barely living, going through the motions, convinced that survival was the same as living. She thought about Ghost, who had every reason to let her die but chose to save her anyway. "No," Sarah said, "not yet. He's still fighting. I won't give up on him while he's still fighting." She climbed out of the wheelchair, her legs unsteady, and opened the kennel door. Chen started to object, but Sarah was already crawling inside, lying down next to Ghost on the padded floor. She draped her arm carefully over his body, mindful of his injuries, and pressed her forehead against his. "You don't get to die," she told him, her voice fierce despite her tears. "You hear me? We made it this far together. You don't get to quit now." Ghost's breathing hitched. For a terrible moment, Sarah thought she'd lost him. Then his tongue came out and licked her hand once, weakly, but deliberately. Sarah stayed in that kennel for 6 hours. The nurses brought her blankets and pillows. "Doctor," Chen checked Ghost's vitals every hour, shaking her head each time. "Medically, he should be gone already," she said. "I don't understand what's keeping him alive." "I do," Sarah said quietly. "He's waiting." "For what?" Sarah thought about Ghost's mate and pups, still in quarantine at a wildlife facility. She thought about the way Ghost had turned away from his family's distress calls to save her, the debt he felt he owed, the loyalty that transcended species boundaries. "He's waiting to know his family is safe," Sarah said. "Can you bring them here, the white female and the pups? Can they see each other?" "Doctor," Chen hesitated. "They're still in quarantine. Protocol says—" "Please," Sarah interrupted. "He's dying anyway. What's protocol compared to giving him peace?" 2 hours later, they set up a temporary viewing area. Ghost's mate, a beautiful white female with intelligent eyes, was brought in a transport crate and placed where Ghost could see her through the glass partition. The 4 pups, now 9 months old and nearly full grown, pressed against the glass. Whining, Ghost lifted his head for the first time in days. He saw his family and made a sound half whine, half howl that spoke of longing and relief. His mate answered, her voice carrying notes Sarah had never heard from wolves before. Not distress, not aggression. Something else. Recognition. Goodbye. Sarah felt Ghost's body relax against hers. His breathing, while still shallow, became more regular. The monitors showed his heart rate stabilizing, just slightly. He needed to see them one more time, Sarah whispered. He needed to know they were okay. That night, Sarah's phone, finally returned to her by the police, began buzzing incessantly. Text messages, hundreds of them. Voicemails filled her inbox. She ignored them all until a nurse insisted she at least look. The messages were from strangers, thousands of strangers. Your story saved my life. I was planning to end it on Christmas Day. Now, I won't. Janet. Chet, I adopted a shelter dog because of you. His name is Ghost June. Michael, 40. I've been alone since my wife died. Your wolf showed me loyalty still exists. Thank you, Robert. Sarah scrolled through message after message, all variations on the same theme. Her story, the lonely ranger saved by a wolf she'd rescued 20 years earlier, had gone viral. News outlets across the country were covering it. People were sending donations to wildlife sanctuaries in her name. Adoption rates at animal shelters had spiked. A notification popped up. Her GoFundMe page, set up by someone she'd never met, had raised $340,000 for Ghost's medical care and to save her cabin from foreclosure. Sarah stared at the number, unable to comprehend it. Strangers, people who'd never met her, who owed her nothing, had given her everything. They'd given her the means to save her home, to pay for Ghost's care, to finally escape the financial trap that had been slowly strangling her for 10 years. She thought about all the years she'd believed she was alone, that no one cared, that she was invisible to the world. She'd been so wrong. Detective Morrison came the next day to take her formal statement. He was a stern-faced man in his 50s, but his eyes were kind. Miss Whitehorse, I need to warn you that this testimony will be difficult. You'll have to relive everything, and Marcus Cole's lawyers will try to discredit you. I don't care, Sarah said. I want him to pay. I want everyone involved to pay. She told Morrison everything. The trafficking barn, Marcus's confession, the camera footage that had recorded it all. She told him about Sheriff Bradley's cover-up, about the 10 years of lies. She told him about being tied to the tree, about Marcus's plan to sell footage of her death. Morrison recorded every word, his expression growing darker. Ms. Whitehorse, what you've uncovered is bigger than we initially realized. The trafficking ring spans 4 states and involves at least 15 people, including 2 other law enforcement officials. Your testimony will be crucial in bringing them all down. Good, Sarah said. My father died trying to stop these people. I won't let his death be meaningless. The legal proceedings moved quickly after that. Marcus's camera had recorded everything, his confession to Daniel Whitehorse's murder, his plan to kill Sarah, his colleague's testimony about the elimination list. With that evidence, plus the testimony of Marcus's panicked colleague, the case was airtight. Marcus Cole was charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder, wildlife trafficking, and a dozen other counts. Sheriff Bradley was charged as an accessory after the fact. The other 13 members of the trafficking ring faced similar charges. The media coverage was relentless. Every news channel wanted his interviews. National Geographic reached out about a documentary. Sarah refused them all. She wasn't a hero. She was just a woman who'd been saved by an animal who remembered kindness. On the 7th day after Christmas, Chen came to Sarah with a different expression, not grief, but cautious hope. His vitals are improving. I don't know how, but Ghost is stabilizing. He's still critical, but he's fighting back. Sarah was in the kennel immediately, her damaged hands gentle on Ghost's fur. His eyes were clearer now, more focused. He licked her fingers with more strength than before. "You stubborn, beautiful creature," Sarah whispered. "You're really going to make it, aren't you?" Over the next week, Ghost's improvement was slow but steady. He began eating small amounts. He could lift his head without struggling. The monitors showed his organs recovering function that Dr. Chen had declared impossible. "I've never seen anything like this," the vet admitted. "Medically, he should be dead, but he's not just surviving, he's healing. It's like he decided he wasn't done yet." As Sarah knew exactly why Ghost was healing, she'd seen it in his eyes when his family was brought to visit. He had something to live for. Someone had refused to give up on him, just as he'd refused to give up on her. But there was something Sarah had been dreading, a conversation she knew was coming. On the 10th day, Dr. Chen finally broached it. "Ghost is going to survive," she said. "But Sarah? He can never be fully wild again. His injuries, his age, he needs continued care. And his family, they've been traumatized by captivity. They shouldn't be released into the wild either. What are you saying?" "I'm saying they need a permanent home, a sanctuary where they can live safely, where Ghost can have the medical care he needs, where his family can stay together without the threats of the wild." Sarah thought about her father's land, 200 acres of pristine wilderness that had sat unused for 10 years because she couldn't bear to face it. Land her father had loved, had died protecting. "I know a place," Sarah said quietly. "My father's property. It's perfect for a sanctuary." Chen's face brightened. "You'd be willing to do that?" "More than willing," Sarah said. "It's what my father would have wanted, protecting what he couldn't, giving second chances to the forgotten and broken." She looked at Ghost, sleeping peacefully now, starting with the one who saved my life. The decision felt right in a way nothing had felt right for 10 years. Sarah had spent a decade surviving, hiding, waiting for life to end. Ghost had shown her something different. He'd shown her that fighting for something, fighting for someone, was what made life worth living. She touched her father's badge in her pocket, the one she'd carried through everything. For the first time since his death, she didn't feel like she'd failed him. She finally understood what he'd been trying to tell her. Protect what I couldn't. Not just the animals, not just the forest, but hope, loyalty, the possibility of connection in a world that felt increasingly isolated. Sarah was going to build something permanent, something that would outlast her grief, a sanctuary where the lost could find home, where loyalty was rewarded, not forgotten, where Ghost and his family could live out their days in peace. It was the least she could do for the wolf who'd taught her how to be human again. 3 weeks after Christmas, Sarah stood in a federal courtroom and watched Marcus Cole's face crumble as the judge read the charges. First-degree murder, attempted murder, interstate wildlife trafficking, conspiracy, racketeering. The list went on for nearly 5 minutes. Marcus's expensive lawyers had tried everything, claiming the camera footage was doctored, that Sarah was mentally unstable from hypothermia, that his confession had been coerced. But the evidence was overwhelming. The camera he'd planted to record Sarah's death had captured his own downfall with perfect clarity. His colleagues' testimony had filled in every gap. The forensic accountants had traced money through a web of shell companies back to Marcus's personal accounts, over $2 million in illegal wildlife sales over 10 years. When the prosecutor asked Sarah to identify her father's killer, she stood and looked directly at Marcus. He couldn't meet her eyes. "That's him," she said, her voice sassy. "Marcus Cole murdered my father, Daniel Whitehorse, on January 18th, 10 years ago. He shot him twice and left him to die of hypothermia in the mountains my father spent his life protecting." Marcus's mother sobbed in the gallery. His father sat stone-faced. Sarah felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only a deep, bone-weary relief that the truth was finally spoken out loud. The judge set bail at $5 million. Marcus was remanded to federal custody pending trial. As marshals led him away in handcuffs, he looked back at Sarah one final time. "I did love you," he said quietly. "That part was real." And as Sarah thought about the engagement ring she'd worn on a chain for 3 years, the symbol of a love that had never existed, she'd thrown it from the helicopter into the darkness. But the weight of it still pressed against her chest sometimes, a phantom pain. "No," she said. "You loved what I could give you. Information, cover, a way to monitor the investigation. That's not love. Love is what Ghost did. Love is choosing someone when you have every reason to walk away. You don't know what that word means." Marcus's face hardened. The mask he'd worn for years, the sympathetic boyfriend, the helpful partner, the man who claimed to care, finally dropped completely. What remained was cold and empty. "You'll never prove I killed your father," he said. "My lawyer says the statute of limitations—" "There's no statute of limitations on murder," Sarah interrupted. "Après. And we have your confession on video. You're going to prison for the rest of your life. Marcus, you're going to die there, alone, with no one who loves you, because no one can love someone who doesn't know how to love back." They took him away. Sarah sat down heavily, her legs shaking. "Oh," Detective Morrison touched her shoulder. "You did good," he said. "Your father would be proud." The trial proceeded quickly after that. With Marcus's videotaped confession and his colleagues' testimony, the prosecution's case was airtight. Sheriff Bradley took a plea deal, 15 years in exchange for testimony against the entire trafficking network. Marcus's 3 companions all made similar deals, each one providing more evidence, more names, more locations. The trafficking ring was larger than anyone had imagined. 15 arrests turned into 23, then 37. Warehouses full of caged animals were raided in 4 states. Federal agents recovered over 200 animals: wolves, bears, eagles, mountain lions, even a pair of endangered lynx. And through it all, the media coverage intensified. Sarah's story, the lonely ranger saved by a wolf she'd rescued 20 years earlier, captured something people desperately needed to believe in. In a world that felt increasingly cruel and disconnected, here was proof that loyalty existed, that kindness mattered, that love could transcend the boundaries of species. But there was one more revelation coming, one more truth that would change everything Sarah thought she knew. Dr. Chen called her to the veterinary hospital on a cold January morning. Ghost was walking now, slowly but steadily, his injuries healing with remarkable speed. Sarah visited him daily, spending hours in his recovery kennel, reading to him from her father's old journals about the forest. I ran some routine blood work, Dr. Chen said, her expression strange. Sarah, I need to show you something. She pulled up a genetic analysis on her computer. This is Ghost's DNA profile. I ran it through our database of known wolf populations to try to determine his origin. Arctic wolves are rare this far south, and I wanted to understand his background. Sarah looked at the screen, not understanding what she was seeing. Ghost is 22 years old. Dr. Chen said quietly. Not 14? 22. That's impossible. Wolves don't live that long in the wild. The average is 6 to 8 years. Even in captivity, they rarely make it past 15. I know, which is why I ran the test 3 times to be sure. Dr. Chen turned the monitor toward Sarah. But there's more. Look at these markers here. They indicate sustained medical intervention over many years. Antibiotic treatments, parasite prevention, wound care, even supplemental nutrition. Sarah, someone has been providing Ghost with veterinary care for over 2 decades. Sarah's mind reeled back through the years, Ghost appearing at her cabin every winter with injuries or illness, Sarah treating him in her shed. Never thinking much about it, it had become routine. Ghost would show up, she'd patch him up, he'd disappear back into the forest. She'd done it so many times, she'd stopped counting. I gave him double his natural lifespan, Sarah whispered. I saved him over and over and never realized I was doing it. Oi, you didn't just save him that first time when you were 14. Chen said. You saved him dozens of times. Every winter when he came back injured or sick, you gave him another year, another chance. You're the reason he lived long enough to save you. Sarah sat down hard, the full weight of it hitting her. She hadn't saved Ghost once. She'd been saving him for 20 years, and he'd been protecting her just as long, appearing during her darkest moments, bringing her food when she was too depressed to eat, standing guard outside her cabin when the loneliness threatened to swallow her whole. They'd been saving each other all along. 2 lost souls who'd found in each other something the world had failed to give them: unconditional loyalty. There's something else, Chen said. She pulled up another file. I also ran DNA on Ghost's mate and pups. Sarah. His mate it is, 16 years old, also far beyond normal wild wolf lifespan. And look at these markers. Dulako looked. The pattern was unmistakable. She's been receiving medical care, too. From you? Sarah thought back. Maybe. I've treated a lot of white wolves over the years. I assumed they were different individuals. But she trailed off, remembering. There was a female with a leg injury 5 years ago. I set the bone and splinted it. She had the same amber eyes as Ghost. I thought she looked like him, but I never made the connection. You saved his family. Chen said. Ghost brought his injured mate to you because he knew you'd help. He trusted you with the most important thing in his life. The realization broke something open in Sarah's chest. All those years, she'd thought she was alone, that no one cared, that she was invisible to the world Ghost had been watching, protecting, bringing his family to her when they needed help, because he knew she'd never turn them away. She hadn't been alone. She'd never been alone. Sarah went to Ghost's kennel and opened the door. He looked up at her with those amber eyes that had seen so much, that had witnessed her worst moments and chosen to stay anyway. She sat down next to him and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I'd given up on everything else." Ghost leaned his weight against her, and Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in 10 years' hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope of someone drowning, but the solid, steady hope of someone who's found ground beneath their feet. The trial reached its conclusion in mid-February. Marcus Cole was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in federal prison without possibility of parole for the murder of Daniel Whitehorse, plus an additional 75 years for the trafficking charges and attempted murder of Sarah. As the sentence was read, Sarah thought about her father, about how he died trying to stop evil, and how that evil had walked free for a decade. But it wasn't free anymore. Justice, delayed but not denied, had finally arrived. Marcus's trafficking empire was dismantled completely. 37 people were convicted and sentenced to a combined 412 years in prison. The federal government passed new legislation officially named Daniels Law that increased penalties for wildlife trafficking and created a specialized task force to combat illegal animal trade. Sarah was invited to Washington, D.C. for the signing ceremony. She stood behind the president as he signed the law, her father's badge pinned to her chest. Cameras flashed, people applauded, but Sarah was thinking about Ghost, recovering in his kennel back home, and about all the animals who would be saved because her father's death had finally meant something. The financial donations kept coming. By March, the total had reached nearly $500,000. Sarah paid off her cabin, paid for Ghost's medical care, and used the rest to begin construction on her father's land. The Whitehorse Wildlife Sanctuary began taking shape in early spring. 200 acres of pristine wilderness, surrounded by secure fencing that kept humans out, but gave the animals freedom to roam. Natural dens, streamed forests, not a cage in sight. This wouldn't be a zoo where people came to gawk. This would be a home for animals who'd been broken by human cruelty and needed a place to heal. Ghost was the sanctuary's first resident. When Dr. Chen finally cleared him for release from the hospital in late March, Sarah drove him to the sanctuary herself. She opened the transport crate at the entrance to the main enclosure, and Ghost stepped out slowly, testing his weight on the healing leg. He looked around at the forest, at the open space, at the den that had been built specifically for him. Then he looked back at Sarah, and she could swear he understood what she'd done. "Welcome home," she said. Ghost's mate and pups were released next. The reunion was everything Sarah could have hoped for. The pups, now nearly a year old and almost full grown, bounded around Ghost in joy. His mate approached more cautiously, sniffing him thoroughly, making sure he was really okay. Then she pressed against his side, and the pack was whole again. Sarah watched from outside the enclosure as Ghost's family explored their new home. She thought about her father's last words, protect what I couldn't, and realized she'd finally figured out what he meant. Not just animals, not just the forest, but the capacity for love itself. The belief that loyalty still existed, that kindness mattered, that one person choosing to care could ripple outward and change everything. Ghost had taught her that. And now, through the sanctuary, through Daniel's law, through the thousands of people who'd been inspired by their story, to adopt animals or donate to conservation or simply choose compassion, that lesson was spreading. The wild remembered, kindness echoed, and sometimes the soul you saved was the one who saved you back. As Sarah turned to leave, Ghost howled, one long, clear note that carried across the sanctuary and into the forest beyond. His family joined in, their voices weaving together in a song of belonging. Sarah touched her father's badge and howled back. It wasn't much of a howl, more of a yell, really. But Ghost's tail wagged. He understood. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a family now. It was wild and white-furred and impossible, but it was hers, and she was going to protect it with everything she had. 6 months after Christmas, Sarah stood at the grand opening of the Daniel Whitehorse Memorial Sanctuary with 200 people gathered around her. Local families, reporters, government officials, and conservationists had all come to witness what had risen from tragedy, a place where the broken could heal and the lost could find home. The main building bore her father's name in carved wood letters above the entrance. Inside were educational displays about wildlife conservation, a small veterinary clinic, and photographs documenting the sanctuary's creation. But the heart of it was outside 10 acres of natural wolf habitat where Ghost and his family lived freely, protected but not caged. Sarah approached the podium with trembling hands. Public speaking had never been her strength. For 10 years, she'd barely spoken to anyone, but today she had something to say. My father taught me that family isn't always blood, she began, her voice carrying across the crowd. Sometimes it's the soul who finds you in the dark and refuses to let go. She told them the story, not the sanitized version the media had created, but the real one, about loneliness so profound it became a physical weight, about standing on a cliff with her father's gun, trying to find one reason not to pull the trigger, about Marcus's betrayal, cutting so deep she thought she'd never trust again. I was dying long before I was tied to that tree, Sarah said. I'd been dying for 10 years, one lonely day at a time. I just didn't know it yet. She told them about Ghost, about a 14-year-old girl who'd saved a wolf pup and thought nothing more of it, about 20 years of quiet loyalty, of a wild creature who kept showing up during her darkest moments, about Christmas Eve, when that loyalty had been tested to its breaking point. Ghost had every reason to let me die, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. His family was calling for him. They were clothed maybe a mile away, trapped and terrified. He could have gone to them. Any animal would have. But he didn't. He chose me. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that choice. She gestured to the wolf enclosure behind her. Through the trees? Ghost's white form was visible, playing with his grandpups, 3 new additions born just 2 months ago. His mate watched from a sunny spot, content. The original 4 pups, now full grown, patrolled the perimeter With the confidence of young adults, this sanctuary exists because one animal remembered kindness. Sarah continued, because loyalty, real loyalty, doesn't calculate odds or count cost. It just shows up. It fights. It refuses to walk away. She paused, gathering herself. In the 6 months since we opened, we've rescued 89 animals from trafficking rings that were exposed by the investigation into Marcus Cole's network. Wolves, bears, eagles, even a pair of mountain lions. Every single one of them was going to die in a cage or be sold to the highest bidder. Now they're here. They're safe. They're home. Sarah pulled out a letter from her pocket, one of thousands she'd received. This is from Janet, a 78-year-old widow in Michigan. She wrote, I was going to end my life on Christmas Day. I'd lost my husband, my children had forgotten about me, and I couldn't see a reason to keep going. Then I saw your story on the news. If a wild wolf could remember kindness after 20 years, maybe I wasn't as forgettable as I thought. I adopted a senior dog from the shelter the next day. Her name is Hope, and she saved my life just like Ghost saved yours. Sarah looked out at the crowd, seeing tears on many faces. I've received over 5,000 letters like Janet's. People who were drowning in loneliness, who thought they were invisible, who needed to believe that loyalty still existed in this world. Ghost didn't just save me. He saved all of us by proving that connection is possible, even across impossible divides. She folded the letter carefully. This sanctuary is dedicated to my father, Daniel Whitehorse, who died protecting what he loved, but it's also dedicated to everyone who's ever felt alone, to everyone who's ever doubted whether showing up matters, to everyone who needs to know that kindness is never wasted, even if it takes 20 years to come back to you. The crowd erupted in applause. Sarah stepped away from the podium, overwhelmed. An elderly woman approached late 70s with kind eyes and weathered hands. She wore traditional Cherokee patterns on her jacket. Sarah Whitehorse, the woman said. Yes, I'm Margaret Whitehorse, your father's aunt, your family. Sarah's world tilted. I thought I had no family left. After Dad died, I looked for relatives, but we lost touch after your grandmother passed, Margaret said gently. Family disagreements, the kind that seem important until suddenly they're not. But I saw you on the news. You look just like her, you know, like your great-grandmother. Margaret pulled out an old photograph, the edges worn soft with time. It showed a young Native American woman in 1940s clothing, standing next to a white wolf. The resemblance to Sarah was striking. The same dark hair, the same determined set to the jaw. Your great-grandmother, Elena, Margaret explained. She saved wolves too. It's in our blood. Sarah, the Whitehorse clan has always been the bridge between humans and the wild. You're not the first to forge this bond. You're just the latest in a long line of women who understood that some connections transcend species. Sarah stared at the photograph, tears blurring her vision. I have family, you have me, Margaret said, pulling Sarah into a hug. And it seems you've built quite a family already. She nodded toward the wolf enclosure, where Ghost had approached the fence and was watching them. Sarah laughed through her tears, a sound she'd forgotten she could make. I thought I was alone. For so long I thought I was completely alone. None of us are alone, Margaret said. We just forget to look for each other. But you reminded a lot of people how to look, how to see, how to show up. Over the following months, the sanctuary grew. With Margaret's help and the continued donations from supporters across the country, they expanded to 20 acres, then 30. They hired 8 employees, veterinary technicians, wildlife experts, educators. 40 volunteers showed up every week to help with everything from fence maintenance to giving tours. School groups came to learn about conservation. Families visited to see the wolves and bears and eagles that had been given second chances. And everywhere Sarah looked, she saw the impact of Ghost's story rippling outward. Adoption rates at animal shelters increased by 40% nationwide. Donations to wildlife conservation organizations tripled. Congress passed additional legislation, strengthening protections for endangered species. 3 other states opened similar sanctuaries, all citing the Whitehorse Sanctuary as their inspiration. But the most profound changes were the personal ones. Sarah started a support group for isolated rural workers, rangers, firefighters, anyone who spent long hours alone in dangerous conditions. The Lonely Rangers, they called themselves, meeting monthly to talk about mental health, loneliness, and the importance of connection. 47 members joined in the first 3 months. Sarah also began therapy, addressing the decade of grief and trauma she'd carried alone. Her therapist helped her understand that her father's death wasn't her fault, that Marcus's betrayal said nothing about her worthiness, that she deserved love and connection as much as anyone. Slowly, carefully, Sarah began to live again, not just survive, but truly live. She dated a park ranger from a neighboring district, nothing serious yet, but the possibility of it felt like spring after a long winter. She adopted 2 senior dogs and a 3-legged cat, all rescues that no one else wanted. Her cabin, once empty and silent, filled with life and noise and joy, on Christmas Eve, 1 year after the day that changed everything. Sarah sat on her cabin porch, watching snow fall gently through the pines. Ghost lay at her feet, gray now around his muzzle, moving more slowly but still present. His family was visible in the distance, the grandpups playing in the snow. Margaret sat in the rocking chair beside her, knitting something with traditional Cherokee patterns. The radio inside played soft music. Not her father's old recordings anymore, but something new, something that belonged to this life, not the one she'd left behind. "What are you thinking about?" Margaret asked. Sarah watched Ghost's breath form clouds in the cold air. She thought about all the years she'd spent believing she was cursed, that everyone she loved was destined to die or leave. She thought about Marcus, rotting in federal prison where he belonged. She thought about her father and how his death had finally brought meaning through the sanctuary and through Daniel's law, mostly. She thought about Ghost, and about a loyalty so profound it had bridged 20 years and the vast gulf between human and wild. "I'm thinking about what Dad tried to tell me before he died," Sarah said. "Protect what I couldn't. I thought he meant the animals, the forest, but he meant something bigger. He meant protect the belief that love exists, that loyalty is real, that showing up matters." She reached down and scratched Ghost behind his graying ears. He leaned into her touch, content. "Ghost taught me that grief is the price we pay for love." Sarah continued, "But love is also what saves us from grief. They're 2 sides of the same thing. You can't have one without the other." Margaret smiled. "Your father would be so proud of you." Sarah touched the badge in her pocket, not as a talisman against fear anymore, but as a reminder of promises kept. I know. I finally believe that. In the distance, Ghost's family began to howl, not in distress or warning, but in celebration, a pack singing together, safe and whole. Ghost lifted his head and added his voice, older and raspier now, but still strong. Sarah howled too. So did Margaret, laughing as she did it. The sound carried across the sanctuary, across the forest, out into the world that had once seemed so cold and empty, but now felt full of possibility. The wild remembered, kindness echoed, and in a small corner of Wyoming, a lonely woman and an old wolf proved that sometimes the soul you save is the one who saves you back. Sarah wasn't alone anymore. She had Ghost. She had Margaret. She had her rescued animals and her support group and the thousands of people who'd been inspired by her story to choose connection over isolation. Most importantly, she had herself back, the woman she'd been before grief hollowed her out, before loneliness convinced her she was invisible. That woman had been sleeping, waiting, holding on through years of darkness. Ghost had woken her up, reminded her that she mattered, that she was worth fighting for. That loyalty, real, unconditional. Cross-species loyalty was the most powerful force in the world. As the sun set on Christmas Eve, Sarah looked at the sanctuary she'd built from her father's dream and her own determination. 89 animals had found safety here. Thousands of people had found hope in their story. And Sarah had found what she'd been searching for all along, a family that chose her, a purpose that filled her, and the unshakable knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. "Merry Christmas, Dad," she whispered to the stars appearing overhead. "I kept my promise. I protected what you couldn't, and I'm finally happy." Ghost rested his head on her foot, warm and solid and real. Margaret hummed softly beside her. Snow continued to fall, gentle and clean, covering old wounds with new possibility. Whitehorse, once the loneliest woman in America, smiled. She wasn't lonely anymore. She would never be lonely again, because the wild had remembered, and in remembering, it had taught her the most important lesson of all, that love, true love, has no expiration date. It waits. It fights. It shows up when you need it most. And sometimes it comes on 4 white paws with amber eyes and refuses to let you die alone in the snow. If you've ever felt invisible, like the world moved on without you, this story is for you. Sarah spent 10 years believing she was alone, that everyone she loved had either died or walked away, that loneliness was her permanent address. Maybe you know that feeling. Maybe you've sat in an empty house, wondering if anyone would notice if you disappeared. Maybe you've convinced yourself that your best days are behind you. That connection is for younger people, that it's too late to matter again. Sarah believed all of that too. Then a wolf she'd saved 20 years earlier came back and proved that loyalty has no expiration date, that kindness is never wasted, that showing up even after decades still matters. Ghost didn't just save Sarah's life. He reminded her that she was worth saving. And here's the truth, so are you. You matter. Your presence matters. The kindness you showed years ago still echoes. It's never too late to build something meaningful, to connect with someone who needs you, to be the loyalty you wish to see. What moment in your life taught you that showing up matters? Have you ever experienced unexpected loyalty from someone or something you'd helped long ago? Share your story in the comments below. We're listening. You're not alone.